You've gotten here in a relatively calm period. It kind of seems to me, as you know, the history here hasn't always been that calm. I was a chief reporter back at the Herald Times covering the 1985 clear-cutting plan, quote unquote. That 7 years later, under public pressure, it actually become what Supervisor Frank Voitas at the time called amenities-based forest management, with the emphasis on non-consumptive uses like recreation, wildlife habitat, preservation, as opposed to extractive uses like timber harvesting and that sort of thing. And it was actually regarded as the most environmentally friendly forest management plan in the National Forest System. Could you assess your management strategy against that standard? Is that still sort of the overriding goal of the Hoosier management, is to make it an environmentally sensitive plan?
Well, so the 85 plan that you're referring to, I assume you mean the 85 forest management plan. Clear cutting plan is one perspective, but of course that plan would have dealt with everything our current plan deals with recreation and wildlife habitat and everything else. But allows for maybe more of a certain activity than the current plan allows for. So the 90, when was it, 92? Is that the right year? Yeah, so there was a revision or a large scale amendment, I guess, at that point. Which largely, as I understand the history, again, I wasn't here for it, but as I understand the history from staff, a lot of that became the '06 plan. A lot of those amendments that were made in the 90s. So there's a lot of similarities from those amendments that were made to the current plan when it was revised. I'm not sure I quite know what the former forest supervisor exactly meant, or his definition of amenities-based. To me that might mean something like focusing on providing those services for recreationalists and encouraging people to get out on the land, and absolutely that's still a focus. The current plan, the '06 plan, still has timber is a component of what we do. We do enter into timber contracts, timber sales, and that's going to continue into the future. But the focus of those are more restoration-based than perhaps they were in the future. I don't want to speculate too much, or in the past, I mean. I don't want to speculate too much about what was done in the past since I wasn't here, but there's more than one reason why we enter into a timber sale, and that is going to continue in the future. There's restoration needs on the land, there's management needs on the land. We're trying to achieve a certain restoration or ecological goal that we feel can be met through a timber prescription of one sort or another, whether it's a thinning or a small scale opening, clear cut, things like that would provide habitat for a variety of species.
Well, let's talk about that in a second. To give an example of what I was talking about, the 85 plan called for 81% of the forest to be timber harvested over a 120-year period. Now that the forest, according to your forest management plans, only about 40% of the Hoosier is actually set aside for timber production now. So on the other 60%, of course, there's a deemed wilderness area, which precludes anything else. What are some of the other uses if the other 60% isn't being timber harvested? What are some of the things that you emphasize outside of the timber area?
Yeah, so it's a mix of things. Within the forest plan, I believe it's 11 different management areas within those. 2 of those are the timber emphasis sort of lands that where we get the timber production that comes from, and you're right, that makes up about 40% of the actual acreage of the 204 or so thousand acres now that the Hoosier is made up of. The other areas, they're a mix. So some of it, like you said, there's the wilderness area is one piece of that. Some of them are riparian protection zones. There's recreation areas is another management area. We have some research, a research natural area. We have some other research area, or excuse me, natural areas where there's a different emphasis. There might be a particular botanical species that's rare, or suite of species within those areas. So there's different emphasis on what we do and what the management is and what our goals are. Not only from an active management standpoint, but also from recreation and how much and what type of recreation we may or may not invite within those specific areas. So it's a range of things.
Okay. Well, if I'm reading the 2006 plan, the allowable timber sale quantity is about 960,000 cubic feet per year, which is about 5.7 million board feet. And if I'm reading it correctly, it looks like those goals, those targets kind of extend over the next 30 years. Yeah. Is that accurate?
It sets an average or a per decade allowable sale quantity within the plan. and it does go out. It actually extends for way more years than that plan will actually be in effect, but it's meant to be a projection going forward.
Right. Well, is the 960,000 cubic feet, is that per year or is that over the decade?
That's, let me see if I get my zeros in the right place, but I believe that's the decadal. So it amounts to an average of 9,600 CCF, or 100 cubic feet, 9,600 cubic feet per year on average, which is a number we haven't attained within the life of that plan. We've been below that.
That's
So
how
the
I read
average
it,
has been
someone else told
well
me that
below.
that was an annual harvest, and I didn't think that was correct. So we got that. So what factors go into that determination then, in terms of that allowable sale quantity? What are some of the factors you consider that's considered in the plan?
Yeah, so that was part of the plan revision process. So that was set at the time. So that was based on an analysis of what the expected sustained yield levels could be over time. So basically, how much the forest is growing in any given year or any given decade. So theoretically, if you were just logging timber and you wanted to make sure you didn't log more than was growing, you have a level there. And then that's decreased by factors having to do with forest health concerns and areas that would have to be buffered and not included for either water protection, habitat protection, things like that. Insect and disease type of events, and also capacity of what either the capacity or the demand is from industry at the time that exists in the local area, and capacity of staff internally to manage the pre-planning as well as the post-administration and inspection of timber harvests as they go on. So it's a lot of variables and factors, and that's the number that they landed on that could be sustained and be reasonable over time.
Is that set in stone? I know you haven't been achieving that goal, but I mean, could you exceed that target?
Well, so again, the plan talks about a 10-year total. So in any given year, you could exceed the amount that would be divided by 10. So you can go up and down, but over the span of 10 years, the plan says we won't exceed that. And like I said, we're not close to doing that for the first 10 years. So a new 10 years is coming up, assuming we don't revise the plan in the next year or two, which I don't think we will. We'll still be under that that sort of cap for a decadal period.
I see. Let me switch my question order here, then we'll follow up on that a little bit. Then, as you mentioned, the timber sale quantity has fluctuated dramatically, according to the records that I have from you all. Between 2008 and 2011, it was between 355,000 and 612,000 cubic feet. But since 2012, you've been down in kind of the 7,000s. Why has there been this dramatic fluctuation there? Was that because of transitional leadership, or?
Yeah, so the number, it's hard to tell on a year-to-year basis unless you really dive into the history and the numbers, and it depends if you're looking at the amount of sales that were offered versus sales that were sold in the end, and what volume was put under a sale and actually harvested. But the numbers do, it has to do with our National Environmental Policy Act requirements and planning analysis, and when a plan is done and complete and a decision signed. Contracting lining up, in terms of when they happen. So it might be where you plan for one timber sale to happen in a given fiscal year. Some kind of snag jumped up, and timing-wise, you couldn't get it completed before the fiscal year, but you issue it in the next one. So it looks like 1 year is really down, but it just the sale happened right after the start of the new fiscal year, and then the other plans you had planned, or the other sales you had planned for the rest of that fiscal year still happened. So then the following year looks like you took this big jump. So I think looking at averages is a little bit better. Our goal is to get to a fairly steady amount. Something that can be predictable. Timber industry, there are a lot of jobs that are created from the harvesting of timber. There are mills that use, in part, Hoosier National Forest lumber to support their operations, and so having a relatively predictable amount that contractors can count on coming forward sort of helps from the business standpoint and from the industry standpoint.
What about that term clear cutting? It was a very controversial issue back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, is clear cutting still a practice that's used, and how's it defined? I know in the 85 plan, a clear cut could have been up to 30 acres.
Yeah. So again, it depends on which area. There's differences between those two areas, management areas, that do allow for timber harvesting on the forest and how large they can be. clear cut is something that you probably ask 20 people and you get 20 different definitions of it is. For someone, a clear cut might be if you cut 2 trees standing right next to each other, that's a clear cut. For others, it has to exceed 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 acres before you consider it a clear cut. So I mean, really the idea is we call it even age harvesting, where you basically, you're taking out at least the predominant number of trees within an area. And the idea being to create a young, early successional forest habitat, which is good for a lot of wildlife species. A lot of people attribute that to game species like turkey and deer, but there's also a tremendous benefit to a lot of songbirds that need that area. And those edge effects, or those edge areas, are also useful for many bat species. So there's different reasons why we do that. And again, the primary motive is not just to put a sale out for financial purposes, but for meeting that ecological need and diversity in our landscape.
Right, right. Well, it's my understanding that a portion of the timber harvests are intended to remove the old pine plantations that were planted back in the 30s and 40s by the Civilian Conservation Corps to sort of jumpstart restoration, stop erosion, and that sort of thing. Do you have a sense, I know I'd asked Judy and I don't think she was able to get me specific numbers, but of the timber harvest, the timber quantities that are sold each year, a sense of the balance between hardwoods and softwoods there?
Yeah, we'll have to get you the numbers. I can't rattle them off the top of my head, but a lot of what we have done over the last, I'd say 10 years, a lot of it has been focused on that conversion from those pine plantations moving forward. I mean, it's a good point. It's this whole area. I mean, this is a lot of what's inspirational to me from the Eastern National Forest. Is a lot of everything that people look at as national forest, including the wilderness area, the Deem. This was largely cut over, abandoned land, eroding quickly before it became national forest. And now you go take a hike and look out in the forest, and it really is an inspiration of what was done. And these CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps crews that came out, were basically doing the best with what they had. I mean, there was a large amount of these pine seedlings. That was what was available. And so we needed planting done on a quick basis and a large number of acres, and that's what was there. So they, with the best of intentions, and it worked for the purposes of controlling erosion, was to get these pines in. But now that they're mature and they're large, and we're, depending on the piece of land, 60, 70, 80 years down the road, it's not the ideal for what we want here. We want native species to be a part of the system. So we're working on removing a lot of those pines and allowing the forest to replace and regenerate with native species.
They don't quite have the lifespan of the hardwoods either, do they? I mean, when I notice a lot when I'm out hiking in the Hoosier, a lot of the down trees, it seems like a disproportionate number of them are the pines. Do they have a shorter lifespan, or would they last forever if we?
Well, they wouldn't last forever, but there's, they do produce seed and they regenerate, and so, you without some active control there, if, as individual trees fall, a lot of times pine will replace them. So yeah, I mean, the lifespan varies. There's a few different species of pine that were planted, but at this point they're at a mature level. We can, cover the costs. We can't go out and cut these ourselves. We don't, it'd be too cost prohibitive. So we enter into contracts with private industry who can make use of that wood. And perform those operations for us.
And you say to regenerate native species. How do you determine what species are going to replace? When you take down a pine plantation, are you primarily focused on marketable timber like oaks and hickories, or is it ecosystems sensitive?
Yeah, it's more sensitive to ecosystem needs, and it depends on the site. It depends on where. We cover a pretty broad expanse from south end of Lake Monroe all the way down to the Ohio River. So it depends on where you are within that gradient. It depends on the site specifics, the topography, the aspect, different things, what species are around in the surrounding area, and what from our a silvicultural perspective and from our folks who are experts in that arena. What we would expect to be there naturally going forward. So it's a variety of answers, but mostly hardwood species.
Right, because that's what's native to southern Indiana primarily. Okay. Well, as we talked